The promise I didn't know I was making. This is one corner of one country, but it's part of a longer story this channel keeps coming back to, because Switzerland never seems to run out of ways to surprise the people who think they already understand it. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a hospice room in Duluth, Minnesota, holding the hand of a woman named Linda Marsh. Linda had spent 40 years as a nurse. She'd spent the last 3 months as a patient. The medication schedule left her clear-headed for only an hour or two a day, and somewhere in the 3rd week, she stopped asking me about my work and started asking me to describe places she would never see again. Beaches. Cities. Once, oddly, the inside of a cathedral in Prague she'd seen once in a magazine in 1988 and never forgotten. That particular afternoon, she asked about Switzerland. I didn't have much to give her. I'm a structural engineer by training. I spend my professional life thinking about load paths, tension cables, how a building distributes its own weight down into the ground without collapsing under it. I had the same mental postcard everyone carries: a sharp gray peak, a red train winding through green hills, cows with bells around their necks grazing on a slope too steep for any American zoning board to allow a house on. I described what I had. She listened with her eyes closed, and every so often she'd ask a question that had nothing to do with scenery. Not what does it look like, but what does it sound like in the mornings, or do the people who live there seem tired? She wasn't collecting images. She was trying to understand what it actually felt like to be a person living inside a place, not just passing through it as a visitor. Then she asked me something I didn't expect. Do you think the mountains still remember what they used to be? I told her I didn't know. I remember she smiled, faintly, like that was somehow the correct answer, like she hadn't wanted certainty from me, just honesty. She died 11 days later. I never got the chance to actually find out and tell her, so I'm telling you instead, because somewhere between a glacier being wrapped in fabric to slow its own disappearance, a village with fewer living residents than a single American apartment building floor, and a bridge built specifically because the ground it once required no longer exists, I found an answer. It wasn't the one I expected to bring back. It wasn't even the one I would have given her in that room if I'd known it at the time. I was wrong about almost everything I assumed going in. This is where I found that out, step by step, in the order I actually learned it, not the order a brochure would put it in. I landed in Zurich still thinking about it as an assignment. A firm I consult for had a legitimate reason to send me. They wanted a report on Alpine construction techniques, foundation anchoring on steep grades, avalanche load calculations, for structures above 2,000 meters. I told myself honestly that the personal errand and the professional one could run in parallel. I believed, walking off that plane, that I understood the shape of the trip already. The mountains were the fixed, immovable variable, and the people living among them were the ones doing all the adapting. I made it 3 days before that framing collapsed completely, standing at the base of the Matterhorn outside Zermatt. At 4,478 meters, the way we tend to picture mountains forming. It's what was left over after nearly everything else around it was ground away. What gets printed on chocolate boxes as a perfect, deliberate pyramid is, in engineering terms, a survivor, the load-bearing remnant of a structure that failed everywhere except this one specific shape. I stood there running numbers in my head out of pure professional habit. Estimated angle of the north face. Rough load distribution across that kind of mass. How something that steep holds its own weight against gravity without a foundation anyone poured. And somewhere in that math, it hit me. I had spent an entire career designing structures specifically to resist the kind of forces that built this mountain. Except nobody designed this. Nothing here was engineered. It simply endured longer than everything around it that didn't. That night, I met a woman named Priska, a hut warden on the Rhône side whose family had guided climbers up this exact route for 3 generations. I asked her, half as research, what first-time visitors get wrong. She didn't hesitate. Most people, she said, assume the mountain is the main event and the town below it is just infrastructure, hotels and cable cars built to service the view. She said it's the reverse. Centuries of accumulated practice in not repeating the mistakes that came before them. I'd flown here expecting to study engineering against nature. I hadn't accounted for the possibility that the real engineering wasn't in any building at all. It was sitting inside people like Priska inherited, unwritten, and far more precise than anything in my own field. That evening, walking back through town after dark, I noticed something I'd missed completely in the daylight glare of tourist shops and cable car signage. Every building in the older part of Zermatt sits on stone pillars, raised about a meter off the ground, with a distinctive flat capstone under each timber post. It's a design called a stadel, used historically for granaries and hay barns, and the flat stone discs exist for one specific reason: to stop rodents from climbing straight up the support posts into stored food. It's such a small, almost comic detail against the backdrop of a 4,478-meter horn peak, and yet it told me more about how people actually survived here than the mountain itself did. Nobody was fighting the Matterhorn head-on. They were solving smaller, quieter, unglamorous problems, one at a time, for centuries, and the mountain simply happened to be the view from where they did it. Numbers that don't mean anything until they do. From Zermatt, I drove north toward the Furka Pass, to a place most itineraries skip entirely on the way to somewhere more photogenic: the ice grotto cut into the Rhône Glacier. Every summer, a small crew carves a new tunnel into the ice, because last year's has already melted away. Inside, the walls glow a deep, saturated blue light filtered through centuries of compressed snow before it reaches your eye. It looks staged. It isn't. Outside the entrance, enormous white geotextile blankets draped over the glacier's surface, like tarps over unfinished construction. It's not decoration. It's triage. The fabric reflects sunlight to slow the melt, buying the ice a few more seasons before it retreats past where any path can reach it. Here's the number that finally landed for me. Since the mid-1800s, the Rhône Glacier has pulled back more than a kilometer. Stand at today's grotto entrance and you're standing in open air where, 170 years ago, you'd have been buried under solid ice roughly 10 football fields uphill from where it ends now. I've designed buildings meant to last a century, and I understand what 100 years of material fatigue looks like on a load-bearing wall. I did not understand what a century looks like written across an entire landscape until I stood inside a hallway of blue ice that won't exist in this shape by the time I'm an old woman, if it exists at all. The guide who gave me that figure had worked this pass every summer for 11 years. The strangest part of her job, she said, isn't the melting. It's watching visitors photograph the tunnel like it's a permanent feature, the way you'd photograph a canyon, when the exact tunnel in their photo will be gone by next June, cut fresh into whatever ice is left. But none of that prepared me for what I found 2 hours south, in a valley I hadn't even heard of before planning this trip. The village everyone assumes will always be there. Most people picturing a Swiss Alpine village picture something essentially eternal: wooden shutters, geraniums spilling out of window boxes, smoke curling from a chimney that has burned the same way for 300 winters, fixed, timeless, unbothered by whatever's happening in the rest of the world. I went looking for exactly that picture in a village called Coripo, tucked into the Verzasca Valley in Ticino, in the Italian-speaking south of the country. I found the picture completely intact. I did not find what I expected underneath it. Coripo is, officially, the smallest municipality in Switzerland by population. Stone houses with heavy slate roofs, pressed shoulder to shoulder up a steep hillside, not for charm, but because flat, buildable land was too scarce to waste on space between walls. From every angle, in every photograph, it looks like it has always been full of people, the way it was clearly built to be. It currently has fewer than a dozen full-time residents. That's the exact assumption that broke. Standing in its one narrow lane, I had assumed these villages were surviving because tradition here is unusually strong, stronger than it is anywhere else. The truth turned out to be closer to the opposite of that. Young people left for jobs in the lowland cities decades ago. For the same ordinary reasons, young people leave rural places on every continent, and what remained behind was a handful of mostly older residents, maintaining a settlement originally built to house 10 times as many people as currently sleep there on any given night. A foundation eventually stepped in, not to preserve a lifestyle for its own sake, but to prevent the village from being abandoned outright. They began restoring the empty houses one at a time as guest houses, so Karipo would have some remaining economic reason to keep existing at all, rather than becoming a photogenic ruin. Tourists now sleep in rooms where families once raised children across 5 and 6 generations. The stone walls are the identical walls. The reason those walls are still standing has almost nothing to do with the reason they were originally built. I was wrong to assume permanence was the default condition of a place like this. Permanence, it turns out, requires constant and fairly exhausting, deliberate effort from somebody, and even then, it isn't guaranteed to be enough. I spent an afternoon with a woman named Elisabetta, who works part-time for the foundation managing the restored houses. She showed me a ledger, an actual paper ledger, not a spreadsheet tracking which stone houses had been renovated, which still needed new roof slate, which owners abroad hadn't been reachable in years because the family that technically still held the deed had scattered across 3 different countries and lost touch with the village entirely. She told me the hardest houses to save aren't the ruined ones. Those, at least everyone agrees, are lost. The hardest ones are the houses still structurally sound, still full of furniture, where an elderly owner moved to a care facility in Locarno, and nobody has decided yet whether to sell, restore, or simply let the roof eventually give in to the winter snow load. Indecision, she said, is what actually empties a village. Not one dramatic event, just years of nobody making a call. A man, a list, and no right answer. I want to introduce you to someone I'll call Anton, a composite drawn from conversations with several dairy farmers across villages like this one, none of whom wanted their exact circumstances attached to their real name on camera. Every detail in this next scene happened, in close to this exact form, to someone in a place like Karipo. Anton is the 5th generation of his family to run the same small herd on the same steep pasture above the village. His grandfather cleared some of these terraces by hand, one boulder at a time, over what must have been years. His father taught him which slopes flood during spring melt, and which ones hold snow too long into the season for safe grazing. 2 years ago, the last other working farmer in the village sold his cattle and moved down to the valley floor, where his children could reach a school without a 2-hour round trip along a single-lane mountain road that closes without warning in bad weather. Anton is the only one left working the land. Here's the decision he's actually living with, in real time, not as a metaphor for something larger. If he stays, he keeps the herd going, keeps the terraces from collapsing into overgrown scrub, keeps one household's lights genuinely on in a village that would otherwise be a beautifully preserved facade with nobody actually living behind it. But his own children are already gone, one in Lugano, one in Zurich, both with lives that have nothing to do with cattle, and the nearest veterinarian is 40 minutes away on a road that closes for roughly 3 months every winter. If he leaves, the last working farm in a 200-year family line ends with him on his watch, and the terraces his great-grandfather spent a lifetime shaping go quiet within a decade, reclaimed by brush and birch saplings. There is no version of this where Anton is simply right. Staying doesn't save the village in any lasting sense. It only delays the ending by however many years. His knees and his back allow him to keep climbing those terrace paths. Leaving doesn't fail the village either, it just admits, out loud, what the population figures have already been quietly saying for 30 straight years. He told me he thinks about it nearly every single morning, standing in the barn before sunrise while the herd is still restless and waiting to be let out. Some mornings he's certain of one answer. By evening of the same day, he's certain of the other. He is 61 years old. He does not know, and told me plainly that he does not know, which decision he will have actually made by the time his body makes the choice for him. I asked him what his father would have said. He didn't answer right away. He just rested his palm against a low wooden beam by the barn door, worn smooth by decades of hands doing the same thing on the way out to pasture. His father, he finally said, never had this decision to make at all. Leaving wasn't a real option in his father's lifetime. Some mornings, he's not sure if having a choice his father never had is a mercy or a burden. Most mornings, he said, it's both. I flew here to study how humans engineer solutions against unforgiving terrain. I did not expect to spend an afternoon watching a man engineer. Nothing at all, just hold a line. One ordinary morning at a time. Against a decline he cannot stop and can, at absolute best, only slow down a little longer than expected. I sat with him in that barn for a long time after the cattle had gone out to pasture, and I didn't have anything useful to offer him. I still don't, if I'm honest. Some problems aren't the kind an outsider gets to solve by asking better questions. We didn't talk much after that. He offered me coffee from a thermos that had clearly made this same walk every morning for years. We watched the herd move up the slope without either of us saying anything else about it. I thanked him and meant it more than the words probably conveyed. Walking back down, I noticed how quiet the whole village actually was underneath the postcard version of itself. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the particular quiet of something running on far fewer people than it was built for. I didn't go anywhere else that day. I drove to the next valley with the radio off and didn't stop for photographs, and let a full night pass before I tried to think clearly about any of it again. Building something to cross a gap that wasn't there 10 years ago. A day later, once I could think in full sentences again, I went to see something that had actually been built, rather than simply endured or slowly let go. Near Gadman, in the Bernese Oberland, there's a bridge called the Trift Bridge. Here's what separates it from every other dramatic suspension bridge photograph you've likely seen out of this country. It wasn't constructed to complete some scenic hiking loop for tourists. It exists because the Trift Glacier retreated so quickly, within a single human lifetime, that the traditional footpath up to the mountain hut above it simply stopped existing. The glacier used to fill that entire gap in the valley floor. Then, within a few decades, it didn't anymore. Hikers were left stranded on one side of a canyon that used to have solid ice running through the bottom of it, with no safe way across to the hut on the other side. So engineers built a bridge across the absence itself, across the specific shape of something that used to be there and now simply isn't. It runs just under 170 meters of cable and aluminum decking, suspended more than 100 meters above the valley floor at its highest point, wide enough for exactly one person at a time to cross. It sways not dangerously, but noticeably, a slow lateral drift with every gust of wind, and that movement is engineered into the design deliberately, rather than fought against, because a perfectly rigid structure spanning that distance would tear itself apart in a serious alpine storm within a few winters. The flexibility isn't a compromise, it's the actual safety feature. I stood in the middle of it, felt it shift slightly under my own weight, and thought about every needlessly rigid, overbuilt structure I've personally signed off on in my career under the mistaken assumption that stiffness and strength were the same property. I was wrong about that too, professionally. Long before this trip, I just hadn't had it demonstrated back to me quite this directly before. The engineer who oversaw part of the original construction told me something I hadn't considered. The bridge had to be assembled almost entirely by helicopter, piece by piece, because there was no road, no crane access, nothing but a footpath too narrow and too exposed to carry the materials in by hand. Every cable, every anchor bolt, every section of decking arrived suspended beneath a rotor, lowered by a pilot working in wind conditions that changed by the minute. He said the crew joked grimly that they were building a bridge over a canyon using a machine that was itself entirely dependent on staying airborne in the same unstable air currents the canyon produced. Nothing about the process was stable. The finished bridge was the only stable thing that came out of it. That's the piece I finally understood. Standing on a bridge engineered to span a hole left behind by vanishing ice. Nothing here is actually static, no matter how the photographs make it look. Not the mountain, which is being ground down by the same glacial mechanics that originally carved it into something recognizable. Not the glacier, which retreats a little further every single summer, blankets or no blankets. Not the village, which only continues to exist today because a specific group of people decided, deliberately and repeatedly, to keep making it exist against the population math. Not even the bridge engineered specifically to bend, because refusing to bend under pressure is precisely how structures fail. I'd arrived expecting to find fixed points to measure everything else against. What I actually found was a country that survives by constantly, quietly renegotiating its own shape with forces that have no interest in negotiating back. I never got to answer Linda's question to her in person, but I went back to the cemetery where she's buried, on a cold morning a few weeks after I got home, and I told her anyway. "Yes," I said, out loud, to a headstone. "The mountains do remember what they used to be, an ancient seabed, once, before two continents crushed it upward into the sky over an unimaginable stretch of time. But that isn't actually the part that stayed with me the longest on the flight home. What stayed with me is that everything I saw over there is being actively, exhaustingly held in its current shape by somebody, right now, in real time." A hut warden reading a mountain carefully enough that her guests come back down alive. A foundation quietly renovating empty stone houses so an entire village doesn't simply disappear from the map. A 61-year-old farmer standing in a barn every single morning, undecided, and still, somehow, showing up anyway. Engineers building a bridge flexible enough to survive the exact forces that made it necessary to build in the first place. None of that is permanence in the way the postcards and the chocolate boxes quietly imply it is. It's something closer to maintenance, constant, unglamorous, and never actually finished, no matter how long it's been going on. The Switzerland I expected to find before this trip was a country that had already arrived at its final, polished, finished form. The Switzerland I actually found is still in the middle of an ongoing argument with gravity, ice, and time, and it is simply choosing, quietly, day after day, not to lose that argument yet. I don't know what Anton will ultimately decide, or when. I don't know how many more summers that particular ice grotto will exist in anything like its current shape before the glacier retreats past, where anyone can still reach it on foot. I don't know if Karipo will have even one living, full-time resident left in it 20 years from now, or just a foundation quietly renting out the memory of one to people like me. I keep thinking about the worn beam in Anton's barn, smoothed by hands that weren't his father's, and probably his grandfather's before that, and how he still rests his own palm against the exact same spot without ever having been told that's where you're supposed to stand. Nobody engineered that. Nobody designed it into the building. It just happened, one generation at a time, the same way the mountain outside his door happened, the same way the empty houses in Karipo happened, the same way the gap under the Trift Bridge happened. Slowly, and then, eventually, undeniably. What I do know is that Linda asked me the right question. She just asked it in the wrong tense. If this story changed how you think about Switzerland, I'd genuinely like to know what stayed with you most. Was it the bridge built over an absence where solid ice used to be? The farmer with no answer that's actually right? Or the glacier that has already, quietly, become a different shape than the one in nearly every photograph you've ever seen of it? Switzerland isn't beautiful because it never changes. It's beautiful because someone, right now, today, is still actively refusing to let it go. This story combines documented Swiss geography, geology, and real social and environmental trends with composite characters created to represent real people and situations for narrative purposes.